So, Jonathan, I don't know, and Mark, I don't know if you two have ever talked to each other before. So, introductions, yes, no.
I sat next to him at the One World Horror Convention I got to go to.
There we go.
Yeah. That was 2016, 15, 14.
I think it's 2015. It's on the back of this shirt, actually.
Okay. Well, yeah, it was a while ago, but it's good to see you again.
Yeah.
I'm older and grayer. In fact, I'm older. My birthday was yesterday, so
Oh yeah, happy birthday!
I'm officially a Beatles song when I'm 64.
Welcome to Dead Headspace. I am your host, Patrick R. McDonough. Unfortunately, today, Brennan could not make it. He'll be back next week when we talk with Mark Matthews. Today, filling in for Brennan is my friend, Mark Allen Gunnels, a author of many, many books. But Mark, say hello.
Hello out there. I am a poor substitute for Brennan, but I will do my best.
That is a lie. You'd be a poor substitute for no one. Jonathan Maberry is with us today. Say hello, sir.
Hello, guys, and it's wonderful to be here.
And last time you were on, it was a while ago. It was January 18th, 2021. So that was season 1, episode 18, one of the very first ones when we started to record video. So that's been a while. This is a very vague question, but what have you been up to since then?
Hope you have a comfortable seat. I am going through the busiest phase of my life. I'm right now writing 4 novels a year, plus short stories, plus comics, plus editing Weird Tales and editing anthologies. So it would take me about an hour to catalog everything that's happened. One of the probably the 2 biggest things. One is the fact that I'm now the editor of Weird Tales, and that's rocking along. And we just made a deal with Blackstone, the publishing house, to also launch a novel imprint of Weird Tales Present, which it's never had a novel before. And so that's exciting. We'll have some big news coming up soon about who's going to be writing for it.
Cool.
And the next 3 issues of Weird Tales are going to absolutely kick ass. The next one coming up, which has been a month or two, it's a sword and sorcery issue. Speaks to my childhood heart. And our lead story is an excerpt of Michael Moorcock's next Elric novel, nice, with an essay about Moorcock by Neil Gaiman.
Wow!
The issue after that's a Hellboy cover story by Mike Mignola and Chris Golden, and the one after that's going to be an Anita Blake cover story by Laurel Hamilton. So Laurel Hamilton. So we're really setting them up and knocking them down as we gear up for the Weird Tales 100th anniversary next year. So that's
smokes. I did not realize. Wow. Yeah, I knew it came out in the 20s. That's a lot to break down. Mark, I'm going to shut the hell up and see if you have anything to add to that.
Well, I mean, it certainly sounds like you don't have enough to do.
I really do need to get a work ethic going on here.
Well, what really strikes me is, as busy as you are and as much as you do, you're one of the nicest and most accessible writers that I've interacted with online.
Wow, you have low standards, but I appreciate it.
Very nice. And I did, before the show started, I mentioned that we met once. I was at the World Horror Convention in 2015 in Atlanta, which was the first one I'd ever been to. And I was on my very first panel, and they set me right next to you. And I was a little bit in awe, but you were so nice to me and you were so gracious, and it made me feel very comfortable. And it gave me the permission to be the big goofball that I am. And so that's not really a question, but just saying that, I do appreciate how kind and generous you are to other writers who are coming up.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, but here's the thing about that. All writers should be that way because we're all book nerds at heart. I mean, whether we're further along in our careers or not is irrelevant. We're all book nerds, and especially the horror crowd, we're all weird book nerds. And we let our freak flag fly all the time because of what we write. And people have been very kind to me along the way, and it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that everyone else around us feels comfortable, feels like they're at home, with family. And that's, the horror community is probably the closest knit family of any of the genre writing communities that I'm involved in. So So it was a pleasure to meet you. And I'm glad to see you again tonight.
That I've heard that from so many people that write in many different genres too. Mark, I want to talk about your experience because that was a new one for me when you were at the was it World Horror Convention with Jonathan. I'd love to know bullet points or a long talk if you want. What was the panel about?
It was a zombie panel.
Ooh, that's cool.
And I had like I said, I never been. I can't go to a lot of conventions because I don't have a lot of money, and conventions don't come near me. But this one was in Atlanta, which was within driving distance, and I didn't expect to be on a panel. But I communicated with the people who were setting it up, and they gave me a few panels I could be on, but only one the day that I could actually be there, and that was the zombie panel because at the time I had a zombie novella out called Asylum and one coming out called Fort, and there were a lot of great people on that panel. And like I said, I was sitting right next to Jonathan, and it's funny if you see the pictures. I was the last one to get there, and the table was not as long as the amount of people they had. So they just pulled me up a seat next to it. So in the pictures, it looks like I literally just walked in and pulled up a seat next to the table. But I was legitimately there.
Yeah, we were going to have security throw you off the stage because it looked like you were just trying to horn in.
But then I was just so damn charming.
Yeah, that's what it is. But, boyish good looks.
But I was very nervous. But like I said, Jonathan was very nice. And like I said, he was the one next to me, so he put me at ease. And I thought it was a great panel. It was a lot of fun. We laughed a lot. Nobody was taking themselves too seriously. I always say, like, I take my work seriously, but I don't take myself seriously. So
that's a very good way to go through this career. Yeah.
It was a great time, and it was just so because I first read Jonathan when Ghost Road Blues came out, which I think was in the early 2000s.
2006.
Yeah. So it was just kind of surreal to be there next to him. And, he has really made a name for himself in the zombie field. So that was nice. It was nice just to sit next to greatness.
Well, if you want to talk sitting next to greatness, one of my early panels after, I think it was when either Rotten Ruin or Dead of Night came out, they put me on a panel next to George Romero. And he created the zombie genre as we know it. And I was so intimidated because when I was 10 years old, I snuck into the movies to see the world premiere of Night of the Living Dead, October 2nd, 1968. So he's been kind of a god to me, And I sat down next to him. Even though I'm a grown man, I'm a martial arts instructor and all this, I should be competent and everything else. Sitting next to Romero freaked me out, but he put me completely at ease. And it's funny you should mention not taking yourself too seriously because he made a comment very much like that. Before we started, he said, you look nervous, kid. He called me kid. He and Stephen King both call me kid. I am not a kid. But, and he said, just think about this. We write about corpses biting people. How serious should we take ourselves? And that was great. And it actually started what became a friendship between the two of us and later on a business working partnership. He was a great guy. And that's the horror community in a nutshell right there. We can't take ourselves too seriously because we make stuff up for a living and we're professional daydreamers. How seriously should you take that? The fact that we do it as business, the business side we take care of, in a nice business-like fashion. But the fact that we're writing down the weird crap that's in our head, if we took ourselves too seriously, our egos would get completely out of control very quickly, and we would not have fun anymore, and people wouldn't have fun with us anymore. So I'm glad you felt at ease that time, and you're one of us. No matter where you are in your career, you're one of us, and that's what makes this all fun. We're all one big, very weird family.
Being able to talk to people like you, Jonathan, or Mark, or whoever else, it's really interesting because no matter who we've talked to, we are recording 150th episode right now, and
awesome.
I haven't talked to one person where they're like actually sincerely saying, "Yeah, I'm pretty much the greatest person." It's always someone that they relate to, like with you or Ronald Kelly or Peter Straub. They're talking about Ray Bradbury, Matheson, and of course George Romero, but who is one of my favorite writers. He's one of my biggest influences. Night of the Living Dead was a big one for me, but it was the remake because I was born in '89 and I saw the Tom Savini remake when I was young, and that had a big impression on me. But my point is that's really neat because before the internet was a big thing, I grew up in a small New England town, and I only had DVDs and VHSs to really watch interviews. I didn't have any way to interact with any. There were no local writers I was aware of, so I thought that I had them on a pedestal for the longest time. And it makes me wonder, you knew them like really well. The guys that you looked up to, how do you think that they would react to stuff like this, like a podcast? Do you think that most of them would be like you or Brian Keene or insert whoever?
Interesting thought, interesting question, because I knew Bradbury and Matheson very well, and they were mentors of mine when I was young. I think Bradbury would be totally jazzed by it, and his usual humility, because he was like the most down-to-earth guy. Matheson would probably not want to do it because he just wasn't that social a cat. And Harlan Ellison would have, even though he would have dominated the conversation and been, epically and hilariously grumpy. But grumpy on behalf of writers. I mean, let's face it, all the rants and stuff that he's accused of being so great was because he hated seeing writers not get paid. I got no stones to throw at that.
Me either.
Yeah, and so I think Bradbury of all of them would have been the most comfortable doing these sorts of things because they are social. I mean, we're sitting in our comfortable chairs, we're at home, on a device, on a science fiction device that suddenly we're able to have this conversation.
Yeah,
I mean, this Zoom is more technologically advanced than the recorders, the communicators in the first series of Star Trek. So. Yeah.
Never thought of that.
I mean, their computers were so old-fashioned. They were like bad flip phones from the late '90s, And here we are having a live conversation in full color from different states. Bradbury would have been so happy about this.
That's wow. That makes perfect sense about all that too. Makes me wonder. And from what I know, he's not like as easygoing as Bradbury, but. What are your thoughts on Philip K. Dick? I didn't even think we'd go here, man, but we're talking about sci-fi now.
I never met him. I actually don't know much about him in terms of personality. I know his writing. I get the impression that he was a very inward guy.
Yeah.
Whereas Heinlein was a little more outward. He was more gregarious because he was more of a science nerd who liked to talk about science and futurism, whereas Philip K. Dick, I mean, he wrote about that, but he was very much in his own head. Probably closer in a lot of ways to Alan Moore, maybe not as grumpy, but the kind of guy who, if you ask a question, there were probably a long silence as he's coming up with his brilliant answer, and then the answer would go on for 45 minutes. So I think that would be Philip K. Dick, and you probably wouldn't put him on a panel so much as a solo thing. But there are other writers who would have been great with this. Frank Herbert would have been fun on these things.
Oh yes, that'd be amazing. I want to lead to anthologies real quick, and we're absolutely going to get to Kagen. It's pronounced Kagen, right?
Kagen.
Damn. All right, one for you, Brennan. I want to go to you, Mark. Is there anything that you want to add to this? Any authors writers that you want to throw in there? Hypotheticals of what if they were in today's society and with technology that we have and take for advantage of, or take for granted rather.
I mean, it's not really anything I've ever really thought about, but I grew up like you in because I'm older than you are. I was born in '74. There was no internet. There was no cell phones back then. So I didn't have any way. I would find magazines with interviews with authors and every now and again, I remember watching the first Stephen King interview I ever saw was on the Whoopi Goldberg show when she had a nighttime talk show.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a VCR at the time, so I took a tape recorder and just taped the audio of it so I could listen to it. So like these days, I'm almost obsessed with like watching author interviews because I'm fascinated by the fact that it's something we all love to do, but we all do it differently. And that's perfectly valid. And I'm always interested in how other people's processes are. So, you know, I do, you know, when some of the older authors, I always do kind of lament that, you know, I can't really find a lot with them because, you know, it was before we were recording every single second of our lives. But so I can't think of any particular author, but I mean, I love Bradbury and Matheson in particular. I also, you know, they go along in my mind with Sterling from the Twilight Zone, which was probably my biggest influence. So, you know, it would be great if, you know, they were here with us and could do these interviews.
Yeah, marvelous.
So, Jonathan, your bibliography is fucking massive, man, and that's not an ego boost. That's a fact. Including a lot of anthologies, and I just went through the final acceptances and rejections for my first one for a weird Western, and I would love to pick your brain because, and I saved it for on air because I know that there's probably someone out there that would listen to this that it might inspire to maybe start their own anthology or jump on board with a publisher like I did. So my first question to you is, what advice would you give to someone that may have never edited before, which was the case with me, but I built up, I think, my experience with this show by having essentially master classes. And on top of that, getting beta notes from everyone I could that I trusted to eventually giving constructive, concise beta notes. So that was my experience, which led up to the editing. But what is your suggestion or input on first time editors or newer editors that want to try an anthology out?
Sure. Well, I'm actually editing 2 right now, so I'm doing my 19th and 20th anthologies right now.
Wow, congrats!
One is a Weird West. One is it's a Deadlands anthology.
Oh, okay.
You know, based on the role playing game. The other one is an anthology based on my Joe Ledger character. It's the second one we're doing on that.
Nice.
But the thing about anthologies, you got to pick a topic that you find fun. You know, something you're a fan of, and something that you know that if you're going to spend, you know, months off and on doing it. It's not like an anthology is an all-day job every day. You keep coming back to it over and over again, but you got to have something that you look forward to coming back to. And that's a big thing. Second, spend a lot of time, you know, figuring out who would be the most fun to work with. I tend to work in what I call the zero bullshit zone. I don't work with people who are prima donnas. I don't work with people who think it's all about them, that they are the superstars. That gets old real fast. I don't have the time or the interest to burn up calories massaging egos and hand-holding. I just don't. So what I do is I usually curate my anthologies. Even the ones that I eventually will do an open call for, I'll curate by maybe bringing in the first 5 or 10 people, reaching out to friends of mine who I know are good, solid writers. You know, ideally some of them who are, you know, well-known names so that we can have marquee names on the cover, but also people I can trust to turn in a good story on time. And if they have issues, they'll reach out to me. We'll have a conversation rather than an argument about things, because sometimes there are, you know, little rough patches, and you want to be able to work with someone to get through that, to make sure that what you come up with at the end of it is something that you're both happy with. That, you know, so creating a good set of guidelines that are easy to follow with a little bit of flexibility, but also making sure that you have some people already on board even before you sell the anthology. You know, you reach out to some people and say, hey, I'm pitching this anthology. This is the premise. I'm going to try to get the best rates possible. If I get a decent deal, would you be in? And, you know, with an estimated lead time for publication. I find that by bringing in those names, first off, it helps sell it to an editor, or if you're going to launch a Kickstarter, it draws interest in the Kickstarter right there, because now you have names that people relate to. They've read their writing, they know how good they are, and they can get enthused about the project. And at the same time, those people then become part of your sales force, because they also, talk about the project. They talk about their involvement in it and so on. They'll share links, and they'll share press releases and cover reveals. And that makes it kind of like an ongoing party to do the anthology. I also make sure that somewhere along the way, I've got to find someone who's better at line editing and proofreading than I am. I'm a structural and content editor. No one in their right mind would trust me to edit for spelling and grammar. I'm a product of the Philadelphia school system, and it shows. So I have people. I usually get someone involved who's going to do that. Whether if it's, for example, if I'm going to a publishing house and taking the project to them, like I've done some stuff with Tiein, with IDW, with Macmillan. They usually have a good in-house editor for the line edits and the proofreading. I still want to give them as clean a copy as possible. Another thing that helps is if you can get someone who is good at that sort of thing, but doesn't necessarily have a name yet, like a well-known career, have them come on board as a kind of I wouldn't say a minion. There's a difference between minion and henchman. The more henchman, minion will do anything for you except kill someone. A henchman will kill someone for you. So you want someone in that zone, and then maybe also give them the opportunity of pitching a story to you as well. That way, you're not only do they get a paycheck, hopefully for the story, but they're also earning some industry chops and goodwill by helping you with things like the proofreading and so on.
That's perfect. So
building it like a family, like a club, rather than just people at the end of emails. That makes it work really well. And also with some of my anthologies, I often do things like this with Zoom calls, because I want to know the people I'm working with. I seriously dislike doing any project if I have never had a face-to-face. Luckily, Zoom allows for a face-to-face. I want to get to know the person, because I want to get a read on whether they are the right balance of creative, skill and good business understanding. And because between those two poles is etiquette. So if all that's in alignment, man, I'm good to go.
Yeah, that's a lot of great input there. Thank you for that.
Sure.
So I've always wondered some things like with sports. You'll hear about these great athletes that are they have this terrible attitude.
Yeah.
And they can't hold on to a single team. Allen Iverson, speaking of one, since we're talking about Philly.
Yep. Great basketball player. Bit of a difficult person to work with at times.
Can you be the greatest writer in the world and still not land a contract because of that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I know people that have really good, have solid careers behind them, but they're not growing their careers because they've become problem children. There are people who reach out to me that maybe I've worked with in the past, and they may notice that I'm doing anthology after anthology and I'm not reaching out to them. Well, there's a reason. I said I don't like to work in a zone where somebody is a prima donna. It's also bad for business too. It slows down the process. You slow down the process, you're spilling money on the floor.
Yeah.
And as much as we love the creative part of this stuff, writing is an art. Publishing is a business that sells copies of art. And you've got to be focused on the business part of it. You have to have good etiquette. You have to have good working relationships. You have to have your head out of your ass. All of that is important. So there are people that I wouldn't work with, even though they may have a whole list of bestsellers behind them. And other people know that is about them too. And it's a shame because they're the only one that got in their way. And, it is, you have to kind of go out of your way to be that, because the publishing world and the writing communities are very accepting, of each other. So you've got to kind of put extra effort into being the kind of jackass that nobody wants to work with. Luckily, they are fairly rare. And I like that about this community. They're pretty rare.
Yeah. You see that even in I don't know if you do, you see that in the independent side too. It's always bizarre.
Even though I am not an indie publisher or an indie published author, except in some short stories, I'm very familiar with the indie world because of the Writers Coffee House and other groups and a lot of the writers conferences. And almost everyone that I know who's doing well in the indie world is doing well because they're treating it like a business. Just because they're their own boss doesn't make it any less of a business, And over the last, since about 2008 or 9, when the changes in digital publishing and digital printing allowed more people to be able to indie publish. And also, since so many people lost their jobs during the economic downturn of 2008-9 in the publishing world, they're now freelancing to indie, so you have editors and agents and book designers freelancing to the indie crowd. So it's actually, the quality of indie books has risen sharply over the last 15 years. So there's no stones to throw at the indie world right now. The Martian was indie.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it was a self-published book.
Holy shit.
Clearly there are some pretty high bars in there. Jay Conrath and a bunch of other folks who go to the indie market, as long as they then respect the audience enough to make sure the product they're selling is high quality, whether it's the cover, layout, content, and editing. And we're seeing more indie people going that extra mile to put out a really competitive product.
Mark, jump in. I'd love your input on this, man.
Well, yeah. I did know that about the Martian, that originally he offered it for free on his website. And
Andy Weir. We're talking about Andy Weir, right?
Weir.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then that happened. So it gives hope to, we're not all going to be Andy Weir, but we could be. So,
and there are also a lot of hybrid writers too.
Yeah.
Who are doing both, because they see
Lansdale's one of them for sure.
Yeah. He's one of my best buds in the business, and he's a smart businessman. He sees the opportunity. He also respects indie work.
Yeah.
And I noticed, I know you have done a lot of work, like you did the novelization for the Wolfman remake, and then you worked in the X-Files world, and then you edited an Alien versus Predator anthology. Yeah. And what is that like when you're working in an established world? Are there a lot of rules, or do they give you a certain amount of freedom? I'm just curious about how that works.
Well, just one little side note. I'm actually now the president of the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers. So I'm at that organization I'm now running. Wow. Founded by Max Allen Collins and Lee Goldberg. My first media tie-in thing was the Wolfman. I had never done any media tie-in work before, and that whole project grew out of I was at home with the flu and watching werewolf movies. For some reason, I watch werewolf movies when I'm sick. I don't know why. It's a thing. Move on. And I was talking about it on Facebook, asking for suggestions. And this one person, of somebody who was following me, happened to be the assistant to the vice president in charge of licensing for Universal. And she said, "Hey, there's this writer guy talking about werewolf movies." And she called me, the vice president called me and said, "Hey, we'd like, any chance you might want to novelize The Wolfman?" She actually asked me, "Have you ever heard of The Wolfman?" Who the hell hasn't heard of The Wolfman?
That's my favorite Universal monster, man.
Yeah. If you look up on the shelf right up there, and it's kind of hard to say, they're fallen over, but that's both versions of The Wolfman, and they fell over. Interesting. Maybe they're making out. Who knows? Weird, but, anyway, so what I thought... What I thought was going to happen was I thought they would show me the movie, and I would, having read the script and seen the movie, I would then write the novel. Oh no, you get the script, and that's all you get. You don't get to see the movie. I didn't see the movie till 10 days after the book was out. I didn't see production stills. I didn't see anything. You have the script, and luckily it was a good script. But the thing is, when you're doing that sort of work, the script is not a novel. You can't just wrap a paragraph around, each line in the script and call it a novel. Like the screenwriter might say, foot chase through London. Well, it's 1890 something London, and it's a foot chase through it. So you've got to do research to find out what 1895 London looks like. Because in my head, it all looks like Christmas Carol, but that was 1850. There's a lot of difference in everything there. So yeah, there's a ton of research to do, and my name was going on it. It was my fifth novel, and I wanted it to be as good as I can make it. So I did research and I wrote a Gothic novel with David Self's excellent script as the bones of it. And it wound up being my first New York Times bestseller, which I was, extremely happy with. And also a #1 Audible bestseller. And you mentioned Peter Straub earlier, Mark. I got an email from Pete. Basically, all it said was "fuck you," and I didn't know why. It's like, what did I do to upset my friend? Turns out that his new book came out on the same day as The Wolfman, and everyone expected it to debut at #1 because his last 20 books had. And The Wolfman debuted at #1, and it kicked him out of the slot. So he was messing with me, but
Which book was that?
I don't remember, quite frankly. Whatever one came out in 2010.
The Hell something club. Fuck, what is it?
Hellfire Club?
I think. I feel like that was it.
It could be it. But in any case, but with media tie-in work, I've done a lot of that, and I've also done comic books where, again, you're writing in somebody else's world. And you have to have the respect to read and know that world as much as possible, and not to go in with the idea that I'm going to change everything, because they don't want you to do that. They want you to add a chapter into that existing story. Like when I was writing for Marvel and doing a Punisher story, I had to read a bunch of Punisher comics because I wrote my first Punisher story in 2008. I hadn't read a comic since 1990. So I had to buy a bunch of trade paperbacks. And by the way, they don't provide you with that. And catch up on what the Punisher was doing and other things in Marvel, and then write a story that honors the tradition and then adds something to it. Not changes everything, adds something to it. And that's the challenge, but it's also the fun too, because it makes you stretch as a writer to be able to come in there and say, okay, this is what's going on. They want, they like the story I pitched. I need to bring something to it that fans are going to read and remember, without feeling like I went and messed up something, because they don't want you to mess with their stuff. Like if somebody wrote a story where Darth Vader, set during the time when Darth Vader's the evil Sith Lord, and it was a story about him raising puppies, people would think it was cute for 1 second, and then it would be outraged.
Yeah,
you got to honor the material, and you also have to respect the fan base without kissing their ass. It's a delicate balance, but once you kind of get into the zone, it's a lot of fun. And I've done, God, I'm looking at some of the anthologies on my shelf that I've been involved in. Hellboy, John Carter of Mars, Sherlock Holmes, True Blood. I actually did one story for a Chud anthology. Remember Chud, that 80s movie? I did a Chud story and tons of other stuff. And
wait, was that what Crystal Lake?
No, it was in New York City. Cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers.
Oh, I meant Crystal Lake Publishing.
Oh, publishing. Probably.
I know that they did that one a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it probably is that. I can't remember. I mean, I've got so many anthologies. Almost all the books on this side of behind me are everything over there, and on this wall are all anthologies that I'm in, and there's just a whole bunch of them. But it's so much fun doing it. And again, it's a good community. The downside of doing media tie-in is usually there's no royalties. It's a work for hire. It's a one and done. The upside is they usually pay you a little more because, it's a one and done for short fiction. The novel side of it, unless you're in the top tier, like Kevin Anderson and Peter David and so on, you're not making a lot of money per novel. So, but it's a great way to build your bones, to make your bones, build your career, get your name out there. Get on the bestseller list, for example, which was the first time I was on there, and it's yay. And it's also just fun. You're playing with somebody else's toys, and that's a lot of fun. I've actually made friends with a lot of the creators of those markets, like Mike Mignola from Hellboy, Charlene Harris from True Blood, George Romero, Night of the Living Dead, Stan Lee. I became friends with them. And that's fun. It's part of the, because you're working with them. Chris Carter, the X-Files, talking to him and doing the 3 X-Files anthologies, and then a novel about Dana Scully as a teenager. I actually pitched that on the phone to him while we were still talking about the X-Files anthologies, and I wound up getting that gig too. You get to know these people. They're so delighted that you're enthused about their world. And they often have insights that may not be in the resource materials that are provided to you. So you're able to build relationships and have a hell of a lot of fun, make a buck, and get noticed. There's no downside.
So cool. if how do you even get into that if you don't have a background?
Well, the easiest way actually is fan fiction. Even though you can't sell fan fiction, if you know, you do some net searches, like things like using Raylan.com, RALAN.com. It's a great resource for finding short stories markets in either magazines or anthologies. Start searching on some of your favorite licenses and seeing if there's any active, anthology or project or book project. Looking at going through the bookstore and looking at who's publishing, like Tiein publishes a lot of that stuff. Tor publishes a lot of that stuff. And then just, looking up to see who the editor was of that book. Google's a wonderful resource to find this stuff out. Reach out to the editor and say, hey, I'm a writer. I've got a couple of pub credits, but not in this, but I do have some fan fiction. I just want to share with you as a writing sample. Not to sell this piece of fan fiction, but to show you how I can honor the material and contribute to that. So many people in our organization started out that way. Nancy Holder, Christopher Golden, they all started out, kind of making that jump from fan fiction to professional stuff. With Nancy and Chris, it was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. They were writing fan fiction. They reached out and they got gigs to work with that. And at the time, they were working. It allowed them to not only work with Joss Whedon back when people thought he was a good guy, but also to get to know the cast. And I've gotten to know the cast of a lot of the projects that I've worked on. While doing the project with Romero, I became friends with the cast, the surviving cast of Night of the Living Dead, the cast of Dawn of the Dead. Ken Faree even wrote who has starred as Peter in Dawn of the Dead, wrote the introduction to one of my short story collections because we had met through Romero. So it's great also for building contacts and going to panels, at things like Comic-Con, Dragon Con, which is coming up, Labor Day this year again, and going to panels on these topics. Often they have somebody who is writing the material, ask them that question, because sometimes they're actually actively looking for people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And by the way, the reason there's somebody's looking for people, it is not always easy to get marquee names for a media tie-in project because the lack of royalties, but for someone who's trying to get in, saying, making that kind of a contact is great, because once you get your foot in the door, it then helps you get contracts for your original material elsewhere.
That's awesome. Ken Faree, man. I love that guy.
He's a character.
He was the father on a show when I was growing up that I was a big fan of, Kenan and Kel. He's obviously a big star in a lot of horror movies too. I'm just going to throw this out there. The Book of Eli. Have either one of you seen that? That or The Matrix would be like, and for The Matrix, it'd have a horror spin on it. Those two would be like my dream tie-ins.
I'm trying to work around the non-disclosure agreement here. You'll be hearing a lot more about the Book of Eli soon, and I will be attached to it. That's
really?
All I can say right now.
Scoop. We got a scoop.
Yeah, it's definitely.
I seriously didn't know that, man. I love that movie.
Yeah, I probably even should be saying that much, but yeah, there's always something working, and who knows? Maybe after this is over and we're done recording, I'll talk to you about it.
Noted. But
yeah, Matrix is harder because it's so tightly plotted that it's hard to find entries into writing new material. Where Book of Eli, it's 30 years after the end of the world, after the burn. It means there's a hell of a lot of stories to tell.
Sure.
And we only have one person's story anyway. So
in one place too. So let's jump ahead to something we can talk about. Your most recently released book. Please say it, because I forgot the pronunciation of it.
Kagen the Damned.
There it is.
Kagen the Damned. My first epic fantasy novel, and also my longest novel so far published. The sequel, which will be out in January, is longer. But it's epic fantasy, and it's funny that started out in kind of a weird way. My background, in fact, is this Zoom thing actually going to be seen by people, or they just? Okay, so I'm going to tilt my screen up, and then over there, you see that book I'm pointing to? That is Lancer edition of Conan the Wanderer. First book I ever bought with my own money when I was 10 years old. And I fell in love with Conan and epic fantasy at that point. I soon after became friends with Sprague de Camp, who the guy who brought Conan back after Howard had committed suicide in the 30s.
Wow.
Weirdly, my wife's grandfather, who was Robert E. Howard's part of the agency that represented Robert E. Howard and everyone else at that era. All the files from his office are now in my possession because he died in 1963 and they were in storage for a long time, and now I have them.
Wow.
So and Sprague was also my wife's unofficial uncle. When we were first dating, she saw a photo of me and Sprague. Said, "Why are you standing with Uncle Sprague?" I'm like, "What?" So I've had a long history with epic fantasy. I loved every book by Michael Moorcock. I read every single one of them, and Roger Zelazny and C.L. Moore and all of them. And but I hadn't actually written much in the way of epic fantasy. A couple short stories, and then one day, and this is kind of weird how publishing works. One day, my editor was at a meeting with the publisher and a bunch of other editors, and the publisher said, "We need to get a bigger market share in epic fantasy. Do any of you know a writer either who is writing one?" And they all shook their head, or a writer in your stable who would be willing to write one. And all the editors looked at my editor, because my editor knows that I can't say no to projects. So he called me up, asked me if I'd be interested, and I said, "Hell yes." I got a pitch to him in 40 minutes. We had a deal in place in 2 hours for a new epic fantasy series. And the premise of this, it's set 50,000 years from now. Our society has completely crumbled to the point that the people in the future have no memory of us.
Okay.
And,
I didn't know if it was set in Earth or that makes sense.
It's Earth. And in the second book, you get a little more of that backstory. And the third book, there'll be more. Magic had come back to Earth. It proliferated for a while, and then it was stamped out, forcibly stamped out. And this new this thing called the Silver Empire rose very, it's a really benign empire that it seems. But we find out that the way they crushed out magic was actually pretty cruel and militant. But now this character called the Witch King has risen, and he's brought magic back in a very big way. And his patron god is Hastur. If you ever read Robert Chambers' The King in Yellow, that character.
You mentioned the King in Yellow too, which I thought was cool.
Yeah, well, because he is the King in Yellow, and the god is the shepherd god, also is the King in Yellow. And his half brother, according to the Lovecraftian, Cthulhu mythos, Hastur's half brother is Cthulhu. So Cthulhu's in the story too, but he's not the bad guy in the story. I had a lot of fun with that. I brought elements of old legends and old folk tales into the story for some of the immortal characters who have survived all these years. The main character, Kagen, is a captain of the palace guard. He's supposed to protect the children of the empress, but he wakes up drunk in a prostitute's bed, and everyone is already, the palace has been conquered. Everyone's already slaughtered. This is the first few pages, so it's not spoilers. And because he was not on duty, even though he had a day off, his oath was to protect the children, and he failed. So he is damned now by his own gods, who actually appear in the sky and turn their back on him. And he wants payback, for this. So the story is all about him trying to get his shit together to try to kill this Witch King, and all the complications that happen. And I just finished the second book, Son of the Poison Rose. It'll be out in January. Much longer book, 207,000 words. And I know that's the long book.
Holy shit.
Epic fantasy tends to be long because of the world building, and culture building and so on.
Yeah.
But I had more fun writing Kagen the Damned than any other book I've ever done. And I love the books. And it's, I've written Son of the Poison Rose, which I just finished a couple of months ago, was my 45th novel since 2006.
Wow.
And it is, I am so in love with this world. I really think people will dig the Kagen stories. And I know a lot of people already read it. Luckily, the audiobook is read by my boy, Ray Porter, who, by the way, we were talking about Andy Weir earlier. Ray won, for audiobook reader of the year last year for reading Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary. But he's between my anthologies, short story collections, and novels, he's read about 40 of my works, and he's amazing. He's absolutely amazing. And of course, I gave him a lot of the Cthulhu language to have to pronounce too. There's actually a translator online, like those translators where it's English to French or English to German. There's one English to the Cthulhu language. So I had a lot of fun with that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's awesome. So I had a lot of fun translating things into Cthulhu, into the language of Relay. And Ray had to pronounce all of it, even though there's a notable lack of vowels in that language. But he did a great job. The audiobook's amazing. And to top it off, my editor had reached out to Michael Moorcock to get a possible cover quote. And Moorcock, first of all, I didn't know Michael was still alive, because he hadn't put out a book in a while, and he hasn't been in the news and anything. And what I did know about Moorcock from some years ago was he's notorious for not giving cover quotes and for writing scathing letters to people whose books were sent to him for cover quotes. But he loved Kagen, and we have a really nice, cover quote on, right on the front of it. And we also got quotes from Robin Hobb, James Rollins, the #1 thriller writer, Shona McGuire, Kevin J. Anderson, and Weston Oakes. All gave us, gave us really strong support. So I'm absolutely thrilled. I just launched Kagen the Damned May 10. I went back to Pennsylvania where I grew up and launched it there, and we had a huge crowd. And I'm just having so much fun with that.
Man, I don't know how I missed that. I wish I knew about that, because I'm only about 45 minutes to an hour from Philly.
Yeah, it was in Doylestown, if you know where Doylestown is.
It's north of there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's in Bucks County.
Oh, man, son of a bitch. I was just in Pennsylvania a few weeks ago for a work thing, and after the hours for this class for work, I got to drive to Phoenixville. And Don Winslow was there doing a signing, so that was cool. At least I got to meet one author in PA.
And it's funny, Ray Porter reads his books too.
Oh, no way. Okay. Mark, jump in, bud.
You mentioned, the length because of the world building. And when it comes to epic fantasy, like the thing that really, as a reader, that draws me into that kind of thing is the world building. Because, all writing is world building to some degree, but a lot of the times we're starting with our world and building on that. But with epic fantasy, there's so much freedom to just really start from the ground up. And not having written anything like that myself, I do wonder, can you talk a little bit about what's that like when you really get to completely create your own and your own societies? And how different is that from when you're starting with sort of a basis of our reality?
Well, I have a kind of a method for world building that I call day in the life. I don't like doing info dump type world building. A lot of writers, they spend so much time creating this world, and they have huge, long documents. Since they become so invested, they think the reader wants to read every detail, and the reader does not want to read every detail. The reader needs to know what the reader needs to know, and maybe some cool extra stuff. So, for example, in my novel Rotten Ruin, which is set 14 years after the zombie apocalypse, I tell the world by having two kids growing up in a small town, in a small isolated town in the zombie wasteland, looking for jobs, because at 15 they have to get jobs or they get their rations cut. So the jobs that they're looking for are jobs that would only exist in a post-zombie apocalypse world. So it allows me to tell about the world without, like I said, just info dumping. We learn little bits and pieces of the history when we need to know them, but we don't learn anything we don't need to know at the time. So with Kagen, he wakes up, and immediately has to run through a city, embroiled in battle to get to the palace. By seeing who's attacking, who are the mercenaries working with the bad guys, and what's burning, what's being attacked, we get a sense of what's important and what's not important, who's who. All of those things have their place because of how they're acting and reacting to each other as the book unfolds. Nothing there are things I want the reader to know, but if they don't need to know it during those chapters, they're not burdened with it during those chapters. And later on, there are times when you can tell a little more. And I use also some epigrams at the beginning of each part of the book that are like historical documents, fragments of historical documents that kind of set the tone a little bit, give a little more insight and historical perspective. And more of the world will actually unfold through conversation. Like there's one character who's a historian, a very self-centered historian. He was the historian for the Silver Empire, which is now, been overthrown. And he's offered an opportunity to become the historian for the new empire. And he's like, sure, I'm right there. And in that discussion, they're asking, well, why are you willing to change, direction so quickly? And he goes into the explanation of how history is written by the victors. And, the Silver Empire were the victors for a while, and their take was this. You guys have this take. So he was able to give that historical perspective in conversation rather than the essay-like, info dumps that you see in some books. So either characters will say it or characters will encounter it as they need to, but you're never going to have a chapter where it's just, this is the world. It's not going to be a chapter out of a history book. If you think of, really what the reader needs to know at the time, that will often inform you about what to say. Now, that said, because we tend to love this world, and often in first draft, we overwrite. Then in second draft, we pare it back to what, taking out the stuff that's there because we want to read it, not because we think the reader really would enjoy it.
That I love that approach. It reminds me a lot of Jasper Fforde. I don't know if you've ever read, because I read his books, and like he doesn't do those info dumps. You realize it as you go along, as it's relevant to the character, and you might finish a book and realize, I don't know all the rules of this society, but I didn't need to know all of them.
Right.
With the story, and in some ways that makes it feel more real. So I love that approach. That sounds really awesome.
Yeah, actually, J.K. Rowling did that really well in the Harry Potter books. Harry, what the reader needs to know is what Harry needs to know. So we learn it as Harry learns it. And that again keeps it vital, because you don't have to recall facts that may be important later, because if they're not important now, you're not going to be burdened with them.
Yeah, that's a really smart approach. So book 2, I'm just curious because you did show that it got leaked. The cover got leaked.
The cover wasn't supposed to be shown until after the first book had been out for like a month and a half. We were planning this big reveal in June or July. And then I happened to be doing a search on actually Kagen, and it said, people who bought this also pre-ordered this. And it's the cover of the new book, and it's up for pre-order on Amazon. I'm like, the hell? So I figured, take control of the message, and went out and said, hey, since it's been leaked, what do you think? And it's a beautiful cover. Rob Grom, who's the art director at St. Martin's Griffin, he's done most of my covers there, and he's amazing. And the Kagen cover is beautiful. The Poison Rose cover is beautiful. So it made a nice moment to be able to share that.
Well, that's really cool. You said it's a lot bigger. So page count wise, do you know how big that book 2 is?
Well, I don't know. Kagen is 176,000 words, and it's 549 pages. So the other one will be 30,000 words longer than that. So you figure probably another 100 pages, somewhere in the sixes, middle to high sixes. But there's a lot happening in it. I don't let my characters rest too much. Also I tend to write ensemble casts. So if there is a point where Kagen has to go on go somewhere, and it's going to take him a week to get there, I'll forget him for a couple of chapters and go and tell somebody else's story and let them get into trouble. And keeps things moving along nicely.
For fantasies, well, this one specifically, I know you got the map, but is there timelines that you wrote down, or is a lot of it in your head? Because there's a lot, man. I just finished reading this. There's a lot to keep account for.
Well, luckily, what you need to know there, I'll kind of remind the reader a little bit in the next book. So there'll be little things that will trigger memories of certain things. But anything you don't need to know from the first book, you're not going to be required to know in the second book. There's things that just happened in the first book, and we don't need to carry that baggage with us. Some things you do, and they'll be echoed by either scenes or conversation about that thing. Like there's a reveal at one point, no spoilers, that the characters are going to talk about very early on in the next book, because that needs to be a focus. That is a big focus of the second book, a certain reveal. But I don't require that everything be remembered, because it's just so much.
Yeah.
What I require is what I want the reader to do is follow the adventure as it unfolds.
Okay.
So I want them to be as much in the present as possible. As far as the chronology in my case, I do have certain things in mind, a timeline for how things, unfold. And one of the funny thing is, like, if I'm writing a contemporary novel, I try to set them in like 5 or 6 days, because people can drive or fly a plane. In epic fantasy, it takes place on one half of a continent, this empire. So getting from one place to another takes days or even weeks. So when I'm doing that, I make sure that like if I figure out how much, like I've actually talked to people who spend time on horses, like people who are professional drovers, which is what they actually call cowboys. They don't really call them cowboys. So drovers who are driving, how long does it take them to go 100 miles? By finding that out, a little bit of research, I can then plan out how long it's going to take Kagen and his companions to go from Argon to Nelphidia, which is 2 different countries in the story, and make sure that there are enough other events happening in the world so that the other characters aren't essentially sitting there twiddling their thumbs. I need to know how long it's going to take for the characters to do the things they're going to do. Kagen does a lot of traveling in the book, by sea, by land, over mountains, and all of those things. I had to figure out how long it would actually take someone on horseback to do that. And it was fun research. It doesn't show, except in the fact that it seems to make sense, because nobody gets anywhere too fast or too slow.
That's perfect. I just got one more question about the book. Brendan sent me questions, but we've kind of covered them. Are you a fan of research and history in particular, or did you have to plow through a lot of digging for certain inspirations for the countries and kind of how they commingle?
Well, I'm a certified research junkie, without a doubt. I'm a big fan of history. I study history a lot, and big fan of politics, because politics play in the book a lot too. The politics of kingdoms and empires, not American politics. And so I do a ton of research, and there are things that I actually talk to experts about in my books too. I am one of those writers that will always reach out to an expert, probably because I studied journalism rather than creative writing when I was in college. And you always want the expert. You want to get a source for something. So there's a section of the second book that takes place on sailing ships of a certain type, based on the Greek trireme. I had to talk to somebody who knows Greek triremes, how big the crew is, what it's like below decks, how they can maneuver, what ships are faster, what could catch them in an open sea. All of that is research I do. What I don't do is, again, info dump all the stuff I found out. Probably the reader gets about 2% of it, the 2% that matters to the story, not all the stuff that I just found fascinating and I need to share it all. And it's fun because you do some good research, and it makes the story very solid. And for people who actually are knowledgeable in certain areas, like there's a remedy that somebody gives Kagen. Kagen wants in the first book to get rid of a hangover. The formula for that recipe is an actual medieval formula for getting rid of a hangover. So I talked to somebody who actually knows something about medieval chemistry and alchemy a little bit. I talked to experts on a number of different subjects, even a little bit of metallurgy and also sword crafting, knife crafting, because Kagen uses daggers rather than swords. But most people think of a dagger as a slim-bladed dagger, but there are a lot of more heavy combat daggers. The Roman short sword is actually in the zone of a long dagger, a combat dagger. So that's the type of sword he has, which is a sturdier blade, can actually withstand the sword cut. But I had to talk to people who actually understood the different types of active blade play and metallurgy, so that I was giving him the right kind of weapon and could justify why he's able to fight against swordsmen with a pair of daggers. So, wow. And then I also tapped my own background. I'm 58 years in jiu-jitsu. I'm an A3 black belt, retired, and also been doing kenjutsu, Japanese swordplay, for over 50 years. So I'm able to make his fighting style make sense for someone of his height, weight, reach, and age, because he's young and very fit, which means he can move fast. So I actually gave him a fighting style, created a fighting style for him that works, that actually would work for someone in that situation. I did the same thing, by the way, when I was writing the Black Panther comic, because I was writing it when Shuri was the Panther. This is years ago. And I wanted to create a fighting style for her that would actually work for a woman of her size and approximate strength. So I love doing that little, if you do that kind of research and build it into the story and do it in a way that you're not showing off your research, my hope is that it turns out to be an entertaining read without me, looking like I'm something of a snob in terms of history or whatever. And I don't want that vibe. I just want them to be totally in the story.
You did that, in my opinion, totally in the story, man. Yeah. Mark, anything to add to this, or otherwise we're going to jump to what are you reading?
Well, I was just going to say, I know this is a new series. How far ahead have you sort of thought? Like, how many books right now do you sort of see?
In Kagen?
Yeah.
I have the third book completely plotted out, and I have kind of capsule synopses for beyond that, because my thought is to do 3 books that are the Witch King cycle, and then after that do standalone novels. And they would be kind of like, if you're familiar with Carl Edward Wagner, who did the Kane novels back in the late 70s, 80s, be more like that, where it's almost a semi-Lovecraftian monster, good guy versus monster sort of story. A little bit of Conan, a little bit of Kane, and a little bit of King Kull too, because he's going to, in one of the books, fight the Serpent Men from Valusia, which is definitely from nod to the King Kull stories by Robert E. Howard. But I probably have the next 4 books pretty well plotted out, so I know what's going to happen. That way, I can lay the groundwork with little clues now that will pay off later on, but that you don't know they're clues now, but they're at moments where you remember them later on.
That's awesome. So Jonathan, what are you currently reading?
Well, I'm it's funny because I read a lot of different things at once. I look for fun, like what I read for entertainment is I actually listen to audio a lot while I'm traveling.
Same.
Right now, I'm actually listening to Kagen the Damned, because I don't get to hear the audiobook until it comes out. And Ray's performance of it is so marvelous that I can enjoy the book, even though I wrote it. I can enjoy it because his inflection and character interpretation brings a newness to it that even me as the writer is able to enjoy. So I'm listening to that. Also, actually going through a lot of late 19th century, earlier 20th century horror short stories. H.L. Mencken and M.R. James and that crowd. Always love that sort of stuff, because I have a whole bunch of short stories I have to write this year. And listening to those kind of give me, fuel my short story mojo. I'm going through the entire Long Halloween Batman thing from I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. There's one graphic novel that collects the whole series. It's just fantastic. So I'm reading that in print, but also reading a ton of nonfiction research about the Dead Sea Scrolls, because the next book I'll be writing, after the one I'm currently writing, which is science fiction, next book I'll be writing is the 13th in my Joe Ledger Weird Science Thriller series, and that will deal with the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Cool.
And also doing science research, because it also deals with weaponized mycotoxins. Basically, imagine if somebody were to take magic mushrooms and weaponize them and introduce that to an enemy stronghold. So say somebody wants to take over a military base. They just aerosolize a fast onset hallucinogenic mushroom. Everybody is tripping balls all over the military base. Bad guys can waltz in and just do what they want to do, and
get a high five.
Yeah. So I thought that would be kind of fun to put a little ayahuasca in there, a little magic mushroom, but also some of the rare mycotoxins that show up in old crypts and tombs. I thought that would be a lot of fun to do as a weapon, because it's not your typical rage virus sort of weapon, which I've used a couple of times. and it allows me to write. Will allow me to write really trippy hallucinogenic scenes. And it's funny because I've never gotten high on mushrooms or anything. So
what about ayahuasca?
Yeah, I haven't done any of that, but I've talked to and will be talking to people who are, very experienced with it, and it's a lot of fun to do that kind of research too. You can get people who are ordinarily pretty straight, and then you hear what their hallucinating, what the trips are. It's like, wow, that came from inside you. That's awesome. So it's going to be a lot of fun to do. So that's the research I'm doing right now.
That's excellent. Mark, what about you? What are you reading?
I just finished Devil's Wake by Tananarive Due and Stephen Barnes, which is a pretty fun take on the zombie story. And then I just started This Time Tomorrow by Emma Straub, Peter Straub's daughter. Mm-hmm. And so far, I'm really enjoying that one. It's kind of a ball. Know that movie? Yeah, but sure. It's my first time I've ever read Emma, but I'm really enjoying it. And I'm beta reading a new novella by Kevin Lucia, and really enjoying that too.
Nice.
Awesome. So I just finished Kagen literally today. And which, by the way, man, I really did love it. I thought it was really cool.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Really.
Yeah. And for the audio listeners who can't see this is by Mark Matthews. He's our next guest. It's Orphans of Bliss. It's the third in a trilogy of an anthology. It's a pretty. Is that backwards?
No. Yeah, a couple of my good buddies there, Josh, Gambino, Kaylin. Yeah, it's nice to see some of my friends in there. Cool.
Yeah, rock solid table of contents. Plus, Mark's an awesome guy himself. So,
what's the first book in that trilogy? Because I want to go grab that.
Oh man, you put me on the spot. I forgot what it was.
Well, I'll look it up. I'll look it up.
Yeah, but I know that he's really great at putting that stuff together too.
Awesome.
So it's just those two right now. Jonathan, where can people follow you? And then Mark, I want to ask you the same thing.
So if they spell my last name right, I'm easy to find. It's Maberry, not Mayb. Mab. JonathanMaberry.com is my website. If anyone out there listening or watching is a writer, on my website is a page called Free Stuff for Writers. Has all sorts of resources, comic book scripts, query letters, all sorts of stuff, downloadable PDFs, grab what you want. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I am currently learning TikTok. Because apparently book talk's a big thing. There's a big book community on there I didn't know about, so I'm learning that. I'm all over the social media. I love social media. Every Thursday, 4 to 5 East Pacific time, I do an Ask Me Anything. So you can join in that. And I'm all over the place. Plus, I'm doing a bunch of signings coming up. Actually, by the time this airs, I'll have done a chunk of them. But doing signings for Kagen right now up and down Southern California.
Cool. Mark?
I'm all the usual places, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. My Instagram, all I do is show pictures of books, though. But I have not joined the TikTok thing that Jonathan has.
I have one toe in that water, so it's not like I'm there yet.
I understand. I work at a university campus, and the young people tell me that Facebook is for old people, and they're always trying to get me to join TikTok and Snapchat, and I'm like, I don't even know what those words are. But Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram is where I usually am, and I have a blog at markgunnels.livejournal.com that is updated semi-regularly.
I'll go check it out.
I just created a TikTok for Dead Headspace only a few months ago, and book talks seems to be a big thing. And that's I'm pretty sure Erica LaRocca flat out said that's he credits people on there for kind of blowing up. Things have gotten worse since we last spoke. That novella. Jonathan, final thoughts, sir.
Well, if you're, since we're talking about epic fantasy and also horror, if you're watching this and you haven't read into either of those genres, you really should. A lot of people are hesitant about horror because they think horror is all just gore and stuff. It's really not. There's hundreds of subgenres of horror. It's so worth diving into. Actually, anthologies are a good start because you find voices, new writers that you may not have heard of before. Take a shot on some of those anthologies, get to know those writers, get to see the range of what horror can do. And with epic fantasy, you can either go old school with the folks you mentioned earlier, or some of the new guys like Joe Abercrombie and so on, who are just writing amazing new stuff right now. So my thing is, if you're going to really try something, dig deep. Spend a couple of weeks or a couple months just really digging into a new genre. You're going to find that there's a lot of richness there, and you're going to have a hell of a lot of fun.
Well said. Mark, final thoughts.
Well, I just want to thank you for inviting me to fill in, especially on a night when I got to talk with Jonathan, who I love listening to him talk. So I'm just grateful to be here. That's my final thought.
My final thoughts are, I reached out to you only a few hours ago, so I'm thankful for that. Jonathan, I'm thankful that we got to talk to you again. And of course, we're open for next year if you want for the sequel. That'd be awesome. Brennan had nothing but high praise for that first book too.
Well, so tell Brennan I said hey, and Patrick and Mark, you guys were a hell of a lot of fun. You ask good questions too, and that makes this easy and fun if you guys are asking questions. So thanks.
That's excellent. And listeners, next episode is 150. This is 150th recorded episode. There's actually one that we recorded in season 1 that I don't know if we'll ever release it. So next episode 150 is with Mark Matthews. As always, thank you for picking us. Have a good night. Have a good night, guys.